Throughout Knights of the Old Republic 1, one of the more central storylines provided in the game centers around the medical liquid known as Kolto. In the Old Republic era, and especially the period in which Knights of the Old Republic is set, Kolto is considered to be one of the most invaluable healing resources in the entire galaxy. This, of course, leads it to being a hotly contested resource for both the Galactic Republic and, of course, Darth Revan's Sith Empire. But the problem with Kolto is that it could only be found on one specific planet, Manaan. Deep within the oceans, on its floors and within its depths, is the only place the miracle liquid could be found, and the only creatures that had access to it were the Selkath, the native species of Manaan. They essentially had a monopoly on the healing market. They had both the Republic and the Sith where they wanted them, and they could do with them what they pleased. And it was for this reason that the Sith Empire couldn't touch Manaan, and Kolto itself gave the Selkath neutrality that most planets didn't get the privilege of having. The Selkath threatened to destroy their Kolto reserves should either faction consider trying to steal it or invade them, and as such they set up a neutrality law that allowed the Sith and the Republic to coexist on the planet and deal with the exportation of the miracle liquid. But, believing themselves invulnerable, the Selkath were blinded by it. They didn't realise they were being manipulated by the Sith, and the Republic and the Empire were kind of having an invisible war in the blind spot of the Selkath's laws and authority. And both factions tried to essentially reverse engineer Kolto. They tried to figure it out if they could synthesize their own versions, but they couldn't. It was truly unique to the ocean floors of Manaan. But it was also at this time that another healing agent existed in the healing market, Bacta. Bacta was exclusively developed on the planet Thyfera, and much like the Kolto of Manaan, Bacta on Thyfera was just as exclusive to that planet. However, relations between the Vratics, the creators of Bacta, was less profound than that of the Selkath, and negotiations to get Kolto in the hands of their armies was a simpler job to be done on Manaan. However, a common misconception here is that Bacta didn't exist at this time. It certainly did. But to our knowledge, at this specific time in Star Wars history, Kolto was either more effective, given that it was a completely natural resource harvested from its ocean floors, or it was just completely and utterly cheaper than Bacta, and thus it could come in bigger supplies. It's not truly known why Kolto was just more popular than Bacta, but we can theorize on that front. But as we all know in the Star Wars universe, as time passes, Kolto becomes less common. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, Kolto is barely ever used or heard of or found anywhere, and Bacta is the prime healing agent of the Galactic Empire, the Republic, the Rebellion, and so it begs the question, why does this change? After the events of the Jedi Civil War, so Knights of the Old Republic 1 and Knights of the Old Republic 2, something strange, very, very strange, began to happen on the ocean depths of Manaan. Kolto's supplies simply began to dwindle rapidly. Nobody knows why this happened. Not only did the quality of pure Kolto begin to decline, making it a less valuable resource in the sense that it just didn't do as good of a job, the amount of it that could be found on the market became that much smaller. Where once the supply chain of Kolto was smooth, quick and efficient, keeping it cost-effective, this began to severely change. Kolto had become ridiculously expensive. There wasn't enough of it to go around, and as such the Republic and those that required Kolto simply abandoned it. As time went on too, relationships with the Vratics began to improve, and despite the fact that they were similar to the Selkath and that they wanted Bacta to only ever be produced on Thyfera, they became very open to sharing their healing resource and technology with the galaxy. And additionally, unlike Kolto, which was truly unique and unreplaceable due to its natural harvesting, Bacta had a number of different compounds that created the miracle liquid, and as such it could be replicated and synthesized by other people. So, as the quantity and the quality of Kolto decreased, the demand went down, and as the quality and quantity of Bacta increased, the demand followed suit. But what effect did this have on the Selkath? It truly was their one ace up their sleeve. They refused to join the Republic because they felt autonomous in their control of Kolto supplies, but now they were just like everybody else. They were forced to put a lot more effort into harvesting kolto despite its declining quality, and they even tried to join the Republic as a means of keeping themselves protected. But because of the sheer amount of corruption on Manaan and just the general arrogance of the race, they were actually refused entry into the Republic. And when the Sith Empire returned to the galaxy around 300 years later, kolto was still common, and the Selkath tried to do the same thing that they did with Darth Revan's Sith Empire. They tried to use kolto as an ace up their sleeve to have neutrality between the Sith and the Republic to try and keep themselves safe in a war that was devastating the galaxy. But this Sith Empire did not care. They wanted kolto, and when they were refused it, they simply destroyed every single surface city on Manaan. This devastated the Selkath race and partially the economy, and they were forced to flee back into Manaan's oceans. While they were down there, they joined the Rift Alliance, a separatist group. However, this was ultimately united by a Jedi Master, and they became kind of Republic aligned during the Great Galactic War, and so the Selkath actually began to secretly support the Republic. But as the war between the Republic and the Empire began to drag out and the Treaty of Coruscant was signed, the Selkath saw this as an opportunity to once again offer kolto as a neutral faction. And the Sith, given that they had been fighting a pretty brutal war, this time couldn't afford to be so reckless. And as such, the Selkath built a surface city known as Mercantile Plaza, where they once again began to distribute kolto to the Republic and the Sith Empire with the guise of neutrality, while also secretly supporting the Republic through the Rift Alliance. With these trade agreements in place and more money coming in, they also began to rebuild many of their surface cities, including Arto, which was originally destroyed, and they found themselves within a better position than they had been during the war. However, war was a key factor in the success of a healing liquid. And when the war was eventually lost and the Sith Empire were run into the ground at some point in history, the demand for kolto dwindled again. And this is where Bacta then really started to take control of the healing market. Not only could it be synthesized, it also became more effective, and the Selkath abandoned their surface cities and isolated themselves from the rest of the galaxy as they lost relevance. However, kolto didn't just disappear, it still was a healing agent, and it still had effect, but it just wasn't very popular anymore. Over the next several thousand years, they did export kolto, but Bacta just became number one. But by the time of the Galactic Civil War, Palpatine knew that kolto still had some part to play. The Selkath themselves were terrified of the Empire. They had no real galactic power anymore, and when they invaded Manaan, many of the Selkath just kind of gave up, and the Empire actually enslaved the entire race, and they turned Manaan into somewhat of a luxury resort. However, in the oceans below, with the Selkath now unable to control their own supplies, the Empire essentially sucked the planet dry of its reserves. The Galactic Empire took pretty much all of the kolto that could be found on Manaan, and this really damaged the Selkath. And by the time the Empire eventually left the planet, their number one resource was scattered and almost completely gone. Yes, presumably it would regrow, it was a natural resource, but this would take time, and with that, kolto became completely irrelevant, and so did the Selkath. If there is one thing I'm really looking forward to in the KOTOR remake, it's Manaan. There is something really peaceful about it, the ambience, the music, and I think it could be one of the more beautifully recreated places if it's done right. And just a fun little question for you guys, nothing serious today, but if you had the choice, what would you rather be placed in? A Bacta tank or a kolto tank? Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button because it tells YouTube that you had an absolutely fantastic time and it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you, always.